Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and actually, we're going to change that sheet up a little bit. So, I just recorded this intro, and it ended up taking like 10 minutes. We don't want to take that long to explain everything, so I'm going to try and fasten it up. And also, I just sneezed right before hitting record, so if I look a little or sound a little nasally, that's why. Okay, we're looking at stacks this week. We're going to look at quarterback, wide receiver stack in this video, wide receiver and tight end stack as well. Later on this week, we'll look at quarterback and tight end stack, and then wide receiver and running back stack. In each instance, I will go over a little bit of advantages that these kinds of stacks may bring to your team, or the drawbacks of having these kinds of stacks on your teams. And I will try. It'll be pretty brief, but I will give you a little brief on that. Now, in each case, quarterbacks, wide receivers, I came up with a combined ADP. I used the Underdog, Sleeper, and Fantasy Pros ADPs in order to get there. In terms of the Underdog ADPs, they tend to be a little bit higher because this is a 3 wide receiver, full PPR type of scoring format, and that is just going to push other positions back. That makes the wide receiver position so important. They get taken very, very highly, especially this year in Underdog currently. In terms of Fantasy Pros, I find it to be a bit of the opposite. They tend to get taken quicker on Fantasy Pros. I have a theory behind that, which is that the Fantasy Pro scoring system rewards you for getting players correct higher up. So, like, if you get the first player overall correct, you get the most points. This is my understanding of it. Might be more nuanced. Maybe it's changed over the years, but you get the most points for that. I think this is a flawed point system because, to me, getting that correct is a lot easier than getting the 72nd player correct. But that is the idea. And if you're not aware, quarterbacks score a lot of points. If you were to look at the top 50 overall players most years, all 32 starting quarterbacks are probably going to make that list. Like, they score a lot of points in fantasy football. Thus, they tend to go a little bit higher in the rankings on Fantasy Pros website, and those rankings tend to get used when people are doing drafts on their website, and thus the ADP tends to be a little bit higher for the quarterback than what you could probably expect in your home draft. Same here. Once again, though, also keep your league specific rules and slots, amount of receivers, etc., all also have an impact on exactly how people are going to end up being drafting. Now, I do the same thing for the wide receivers, tight ends, running backs when relevant in terms of taking the ADPs from these 3 sources. At the end, I hope this ADP works pretty well. I did look closer at things, and today's video will be looking at the best and the worst. And so we'll have some explanations, more specifically in terms to the best, of where I looked a little bit closer at these numbers. So sometimes I'm just manually going to maybe adjust this a little bit based on, like, if 2 are very similar and one's wildly different than that one in terms of the combined ADP. Now, over here are the main numbers that we're going to be used. Right now, I have it, this whole sheet, which you can find up on the website, www.theFFforge.com. Link down in the description, and you could download it, mess with it on your own, or just look at it if you want it on the website a little bit closer. But right now, and where I will have it sorted via this column. This is the average of the quarterback and the wide receiver ADPs, and the lower the ADP between the two, the better / the best quarterback wide receiver stacks, and to the opposite, the worst quarterback wide receiver stacks being down here. Now, we are looking at a specific pool of players here. 46 wide receivers end up making the cut. I think I looked at roughly the top 48 wide receivers or so before making a couple of cuts, just due to stacks that we wouldn't expect to typically get in a 12-team league. Also, this column over here, the lower, theoretically, the worse, because this is the difference between the ADP. So you can see the average ADP here, 33, 34. Typically, that should make it harder to get the players together, but sometimes you're taking picks back to back. So it also depends exactly where are they going. Are they going on average around the turn or not? And is that, is that consistently happening? That's what this number looks at, the standard deviation. So just to give you an idea of how standard deviation works, actually, we'll just look at it here. For Lamar Jackson, you can see these 3 ADPs on all three platforms that I looked at are very, very similar, whereas when you go look at Geno Smith, very, very different. About 30, a grand total of 60 spots or more than that, 73.3 difference from the lowest to the highest, and one that's kind of right smack dab in the middle there. So a wide variety of, where is Geno Smith going to go in your draft? I have no freaking clue based on this. It's a pretty wide, I mean, I have a clue, but it's a pretty wide area that he could get taken in according to that data. So this just gives you an idea of how reliable, in a sense, that this information is. Now, the last thing I want to show you, if you're in a 10-team league, a lot of this I'm talking about things in 12-team leagues. I did give you a little chart down here that you could use in a 14 league, 8-team league. You can make this on your own. This just makes it a little bit easier. This is what I did while looking at these to figure out how easy or hard it is to get the stacks based on the ADPs. So you get, a guy with an ADP of 33 and 34. Does that happen to be around a turn or not? Well, I guess around that 3-4 turn, you could probably get both of them. It might not be so hard, and you're not really going to be reaching too poorly or too highly there if they're both available for you around this turn here, the 3-4 turn once again. So I think that just makes it all easier. And like I said, I will explain a little bit. So the quarterback wide receiver stack is the king of stacks. They have the highest correlation to one another, to the points that you're going to end up getting on your team. They make your team more boom or bust ultimately. And whether it's more boom or bust depends on, of course, if it's a good or a bad stack. Because the good stacks, we're expecting high points from both of these players. So more boom on the good weeks, whereas the bad stacks, more back. Of course, there's a little bit of nuance to it, but we can't for sure know how that nuance is going to work out in the season anyway, so this is, just one way to look at it. One factor to account for, too, in terms of how adverse you should or should not be with quarterback wide receiver stacks, is that the larger the league, the less risk adverse you should be, the more ceiling that you will need. The smaller the league, the more you want to aim for consistency. So the larger the league, the more that you should be trying to attack getting a quarterback wide receiver stack. In an 8-team league, don't go out of your way. Don't start reaching in order to force a stack to happen, because ultimately you just want the best players on your team. It's such a tight window in order to win when the talent is so great amongst all opponents, whereas at a 14-team league, there's going to be some teams that are just dog crap halfway through the season because there's just not quite enough talent to really fully give 14 rosters there's more parity is what it is. And so when there's more parity, you should be attacking some of these quarterback wide receiver stacks, because if you get it correct, then you're going to have, on average, week in and week out, an advantage against your opponents, because you got, two of the best players at both of their positions around the league. So this is, if I didn't say, this is a limited set here, working with 46 wide receivers. I think I told you that. So let's start off with the 10 worst quarterback wide receiver matchups, starting off with Jared Goff and Jameson Williams. Here is the single worst 10th worst wide receiver quarterback stack. I think that's makes a lot of sense. Jameson Williams is a guy that we are projecting a lot. Jared Goff, they tend to like to run the ball and get a lot of touchdowns on the ground, so his production has been limited, although fairly consistent, and it is still a good offense. But especially once you include Jameson Williams into that conversation, it gets a little bit iffy on how much you could trust this to really produce for you. And I think you'd find yourself, not with an advantage most weeks. Derek Carr, Chris Olave. I'm a really big fan of Chris Olave. This kind of works to the opposite effect. Derek Carr, last year especially, really struggled to get the ball into the end zone to get those touchdowns and make him a difference maker at quarterback. His fantasy production was quite poor because of that. And so if you have that on the opposite end, especially if that's affecting Chris Olave and preventing him from being much better, well, that's going to be bad news for your fantasy football team. Then you look at Geno Smith, DK Metcalf. Geno Smith, is just really weighing that team up down. Baker Mayfield, Chris Godwin. It's going to be our 7th worst. Will Levis, Calvin Ridley, 8th worst. I think Will Levis makes the list twice. This makes some sense. There's a lot of risk to getting Will Levis, and I think that has impacted how highly we think of Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins a little bit too, right? Smack dab in the middle there, Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors. A lot of questions here on how this could turn out, but also very exciting player in Malik Neighbors. So, it's tempting. I wouldn't bother trying to match him up with Daniel Jones though. Then we get to the 3rd worst matchups. J.J. McCarthy, Jordan Addison. J.J. McCarthy going, quite late, obviously. And Jordan Addison, we're expecting to take a step back. So I think that this makes a lot of sense. Geno Smith, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Is this the second Geno Smith on here, right? So obviously just, the ADP of these guys really weighing down this matchup. But it's still, on average, one of the worst. And Bryce Young, Deontay Johnson. I think, that makes a lot of sense to be the worst team up here. And there you go. Those are the 10 worst quarterback, wide receiver stacks. But the 10 worst out of the top 46. Keep that in mind, out of the top 46. Still, I think we're at a point here where, I'd rather... It's not that I'm going to not take Derek Carr because I have Chris Olave. It's just that I'm only going to take Derek Carr because I'm taking a quarterback and he's next up on my list. There's no tiebreaker here that's going to make me want to get him and Chris Olave and Derek Carr. And in fact, maybe I do avoid it a little bit just because I don't want that many eggs in the New Orleans offense of basket. That could make sense too, depending on exactly how you think about that. I do think that offense will be a little bit better, and I do think that was a bad streak last year that won't repeat itself in terms of not getting touchdowns, which really hurt the fantasy value. So I wouldn't be so adverse about it, but understandable. That's going to bring us on to the 10 best. Do I have them? Look at that. Perfectly highlighted. And it's going to start off with CJ Stroud, Tank Dell as the 10th best quarterback, wide receiver stack. If you don't draft from an early round picks 1 through 4, you would need to target these two around the 4th, 5th round turn. I think it would be wise to target Stroud first, but you should know the board and know which would be more likely to be taken between your two picks when you're picking from the 1-4 area. For instance, if Jalen Hurts gets taken by the first pick of the person who has the first pick of the draft in the 3rd round, and you have the 2nd pick of the draft, and then around that 4-5 turn, you could be like 100% sure, unless it's a 2-quarterback league, that your opponent is not going to be taking CJ Stroud. So in that instance, you would take Tank Dell and then CJ Stroud in the early 5th round because it's obvious. So these are things, keep track of when you're around those turns, keep track of what your opponents are doing, especially at the quarterback and tight end spots. It can help you to make your decisions of which position to grab a little bit easier. That brings us on to the number 9 quarterback wide receiver stack here in Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison. If you have a late round draft picks 9 through 12, you can take Marvin Harrison Jr. around the 1st round turn. And then come the 7th round, you could expect that Kyler might be there, and bada bing, bada boom, you've got the stack. It's too much of a reach to take him in the 6th round, unless, of course, you're a big fan and believer of this combination. Then feel free to go ahead and do it. But it's one of those things where you'd really be reaching a lot to take Kyler Murray, and he might be there for you come the 7th round. So not an easy stack necessarily based on the averages, and you can see they tend to get taken fairly, consistently where they're going, both of them. So it doesn't quite work out perfectly. What I will say as well here is that I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going a little bit too high, so we'll see if that ends up changing by the time that the actual drafts come around. Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman is our 8th highest stack there. If you take Michael Pittman mid to late 3rd round from a mid to late round position, picks 5 through 12, then there is a chance that you will see Anthony Richardson there available for you in the 5th round. That's how that one would work. So that's one that you could definitely aim for and have a chance of success there. 3rd, 5th rounds is when you would get those two. The 7th best stack, Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers. You cannot reliably plan on getting both of these two. Your best chance is going to be if you have an early round pick. So picks 1 through 4, and Lamar Jackson falls just a little bit to you into the late 4th round. Then you could grab him there, and you might be able to get Zay Flowers around the turn and the early 5th round portion of your draft. So that one's, it doesn't come out to work too often. Then CJ Stroud and Stephon Diggs is going to be your 6th best stack. And if you have a mid-round pick, picks 5 through 8, we're talking you could probably grab Diggs in the 3rd round. And then there's going to be a solid chance that Stroud will be there in the 4th round, though you are going to be taking Stroud at his ceiling there in that mid-4th round area. So you really got to be, you can make this happen if you get Diggs pretty easily. But once again, how much faith do you have in that Houston team? Should determine if you actually want to make that happen. But Stroud will probably be gone by the time that you get around to your mid-5th round area of the draft. Maybe that will change by draft time, but he's only been going up so far. And I would much rather get him in like that 5th round than that 4th round myself. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb's going to make up the 5th best stack. If you get CeeDee Lamb early in the 1st round, those top 3 picks really, then you would have to reach into the early 5th round to guarantee that you would get Dak Prescott if you want to make sure that you get this stack. That said, there is a chance that Dak Prescott could still be there in the 8th round. So I would say expect to take Dak in that 6-7 turn would be the intention. If somebody happens to take him earlier, too bad. At least you didn't reach for him. And if you forget about it, or if some great value happens to be there around that 6-7 turn, well, there's a chance he could be there in the 8th round. You can see there the wide variety of places that he's getting taken. Probably not going to be making it to the 8th round, but maybe. So there you go. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase make up our next best stack. If you get Jamar Chase early in the early to mid 1st round, then you could reach for Joe Burrow early on in the 5th round, or you could risk it, and there's a chance that he would be there late in the 6th round, but probably not. So this is a scenario where if you want that stack, you're probably going to just want to be reaching for him early on in the 5th round, even though it is a little bit of a reach. If you believe in it, go for it. That's going to bring us on to our top 3 stacks. Starting off, let's highlight these 3 here with, once again, you will notice for the 3rd time, CJ Stroud, this time with his number 1 man in Nico Collins. And this is a target for early round picks. If you have one of the top 4 picks in your draft, you can take Nico Collins late in the 2nd round, and then you can take CJ Stroud late in the 4th round. They're both going within those areas, so this is a natural stack that I don't want to say expect to happen, but there's a decent enough chance that you could get both of them if you want to target that. And that's going to bring us on to the Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown top 2 stacks there. Of course, A.J. Brown, Hurts being number 1 overall. First, we'll look at the Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts stack. And this can be targeted around the 3-4 turn. So most likely to succeed via picks 9 through 12, because that's who's going to have those picks around that 3-4 turn. Taking Hurts mid-3rd is going to be possible. That Devonta Smith could end up falling a little bit to you in the 4th round as well. So if you wanted to reach just a little bit for Hurts, you get a little bit lucky, Devonta Smith might be there for you. It's possible. So just something to keep in mind if you really like that stack, and maybe you missed out on the Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown stack earlier, because you're going to be looking in the same area here. A.J. Brown, you can get him mid to late. He's really going at like pick 9, no matter what, is basically where you can expect that A.J. Brown is going to go in your draft currently. And you can get Jalen in the mid-3rd round, so maybe you're taking him a couple of picks early, Jalen Hurts, but whatever. If you want that stack, that is via the numbers here, the number 1 stack to own. So there we go. Those are the best wide receiver and quarterback stacks, and the worst as we went through. A couple of honorable mentions for tougher stacks to get that we have not discussed. The Jordan Love and Christian Watson / Jordan Love and Jaden Reed stack is really tough. Actually, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we are seeing CJ Stroud in here 3 times in the top 10. I think that that is a warning sign that the value overall on these 4 players is at its ceiling, because not all 3 of them are going to end up being, if we were to do this at the end of the year, I doubt that all 3 receivers of CJ Stroud are going to end up being, top 10 stacks available to you. So keep that in mind. Beware, somebody's not going to live up to their ADP amongst this group. Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. And the reason they're all getting taken high is because we're not sure who it is that's going to fall off, and a lot of us have different ideas of it. And I got to tell you, even though all of that is said, you do the projections, and they still do all project pretty nicely too. So it just depends how you do those projections exactly, but no matter what, you can get them all to have pretty good numbers. So just wanted to bring that up. And right behind that, too, was Patrick Mahomes, Hollywood Brown. So actually, Patrick Mahomes and Hollywood Brown is not a stack that you can expect to make happen. You can see they're like exactly 24 spots apart. I don't know. That impacts it, but that was one of the tougher stacks. Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., tough. Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. I think that one was really tough. I have that ranked 4th, though, so maybe it was that Jordan Love, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed was the toughest. Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr., yeah, right in that 25 spots apart territory. No, I don't know. Yeah, I did the research already. Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice / Patrick Mahomes and Xavier Worthy all getting taken near each other. And then Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey also a tough stack currently. So if those are stacks that you like, maybe don't bank on being able to get them as part of your draft strategy. Now, I told you we would look at some wide receiver and tight end stacks as well. This should go a little bit quicker, but first of all, why would you take this stack? What is it going to provide for your team? Well, this is going to lower your ceiling not almost certainly, but it's going to lower your ceiling by a little ways. It's not like statistically crazy. And if they're on a top scoring team, it's going to give you a higher floor. I will give you an example of that at the end of this. One factor to account for in terms of how adverse you should or should not be with a wide receiver / tight end stack is that the larger the league, the less risk adverse you should be, the more ceiling that you need. The smaller the league, the more you want to aim for consistency. I do not think that league size should really impact your willingness to draft a wide receiver and a tight end from the same team, unless you're talking about a 6-team league or less, a 4-team league. I know you say that doesn't happen. It does happen, and I know that there's at least one person that came to my channel regularly last offseason that was in a 4-team, small family league. In these cases, I would avoid grabbing the wide receiver and tight end stack together in search of more team parity once again. As you will see, I think that there's a lot of gray area as well in these stacks, because I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal opinion on these stacks. We're just going to look at the 5 best stacks, and for the record, I ended up with 35 pairings after cutting down some of the fat from here. So we got the top 35 tight end and wide receiver stacks. We already have this in the right order, so we can already see them. This starts off with the 5th best stack at George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk. And I wrote sure next to this in terms of attacking this stack or not. How can you get it? Well, if you have an early round pick, you can get Ayuk around the 2-3 turn, and then you could reach just a little bit for Kittle in the early 5th round, or you could bank on a little bit of good luck and hope that he makes it back around to you in the late 6th round is how it works. He kind of typically gets taken between, late 5th, early 6th round is kind of his hot spot. So you reach for it, or you could take a little bit of luck on it and possibly get him. I know I have seen him drop sometimes when I simulate drafts, so it's very possible. But this is a stack that I do think there's going to be enough boom or bustness, but also enough scoring in this offense. Like, to me, George Kittle, it's just kind of independent of Brandon Ayuk. It's you if you draft him, you're just gonna have to live with the bruises. There's gonna be weeks that he's just gonna be blocking mostly, and they're not gonna have him as a big part of the passing game plan. He's a big part of the game plan, but not a part of the game plan that helps your fantasy football team. And so that's just going to happen sometimes with George Kittle. But at least the weeks that George Kittle goes off, that's probably going to be a week that Brandon Ayuk doesn't. I can tell you from experience last year that seems to be pretty accurate. And now you've got some consistency built for your team. Once again, that higher floor week in and week out between having George Kittle and Ayuk. And this is, once again, a team that you can be fairly sure is going to be in a lot of games, is going to be not, putting up any goose eggs and just absolutely killing you between the two of them. The fourth next best stack, according to the numbers, is going to be Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb. And I will go more into this stack. I like this stack. I've got, well, they're all in all caps, but I got an all caps yes next to this one. If you get CeeDee Lamb in the top 3 picks where he is going, you could reach a little bit for Jake in the 7th round, which is probably not worth doing, but he very well may be there in the 8th round for you. It seems more likely that he'll get drafted just before he gets to you, but if you be patient with it and you end up getting this stack, I think that you're going to like this stack quite a bit. And I think in part because you get Jake Ferguson at a nice value there in the 8th round. So bring us on to Kyle Pitts, Drake London. Really surprising that this stack makes it here, but it does. And I think that gives you an idea of what, people are drafting this Atlanta, and I have them ranked. I don't think that these guys are like terrible draft picks where they're going. I'm a believer in this Atlanta offense. I'm a believer in the talent that just hasn't been able to show itself, and the quarterback that will now hopefully lift up that talent. But currently, I'm not the only one that's a big believer in that. And so this becomes one of the better stacks. And I do think that it needs to be said that this is probably the riskiest stack. It stands out for a reason. But once again, I am a believer of it. So if you're a believer of it, of course, if you're drafting both these guys, you probably are. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And you can get Drake in the middle of the 2nd round, and Pitts will likely be there for you in the 5th round when you would be up on the board at that point in time. So not too hard of a stack to get. Then that's going to bring us on to the number 2 tight end wide receiver stack here. Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. Remember, we need a high-scoring team, or else all we're doing is hurting our team's ceiling. And I think that's what you run a risk of doing here, is just hurting your ceiling. There just might not be enough touchdowns. That said, it's really not Arizona's offense that we're extremely worried about. It's more so the defense. But Kyler Murray's only ever thrown 24 touchdowns. Is the most touchdowns he's thrown in his career. Did it twice out of the 4 years he's been in the league. And those were the 2 years that he played the most. But to me, the value, it really just comes down to the value here. Like Trey McBride, it's not that I disagree with the value. It's just that I think that there are some other guys that we can take that are going to be close to as productive as him a little bit later. And for Marvin Harrison, I think that he's going a little bit too high. So to me, this is not a stack that I want to be attacking. And that's going to bring us on to our number 1 stack, the Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown. This makes sense as the best tight end wide receiver stack. Via the numbers, not going to argue with wherever both of them are getting taken. Once again, I do make a similar argument for Sam Laporta that I just did about Trey McBride. But I'd rather be patient with my tight end spot. But I get it. I totally get why you would be willing to take these two as high as they're going for the most part. But tight ends they're a different breed. They're not wide receivers. Anyways, you can take Amon-Ra St. Brown between picks 5 through 8 is where you're going to get him in the draft. And then you can come around and you take Sam Laporta in the 2nd round. So you really, you can make this happen quite easily if you get Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this is a strategy you can walk into saying, I'm going to go, tight end in the 2nd round. I'm getting Sam Laporta, and I want to bank that up with Amon-Ra St. Brown to give my team this higher floor. Now for the rest of the draft, hey, I want to target a couple of guys who might give me a little more boom or bust, a little bit of spice, just in case I happen to be playing that guy in a week where this Detroit offense, meets the Baltimore defense of last year, and just absolutely, it's not a good game for anybody. I don't remember fantasy point wise. Maybe there were some fantasy. You get what I'm saying though, is that in case Detroit runs across a buzzsaw, you might have a guy or two on your roster that are just bringing a little bit of spice into your lineup to help make up for that. Now, for my money here, the one that I would most like to have in terms of value and everything is going to be that CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson matchup there. I think that's a really good wide receiver tight end stack to get. CeeDee Lamb brings you one of the best ceilings, so you can pair that up with a slightly higher floor in Ferguson. I don't think when you have a ceiling that high as CeeDee Lamb, there's a reason he's going as high as, he's going to fantasy drafts. If you believe in him, taking him first overall or so, then you obviously believe in that. And I think all that Jake Ferguson does is then it props up the floor. So you already have the really, really high ceiling. You don't need to worry about changing your draft style at all, because it's just like, we know Dak Prescott loves that Jake Ferguson, that tight end spot consistently, regardless of how well they do or not. And here is something to think of. And once again, that Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown stack, perfectly great too. So there could be one or two games where this offense struggles to do anything. I talked about that with the Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown stack, but that's the maximum that you're going to be thinking is possible, or else why would you be drafting CeeDee Lamb this highly in your draft? So I expect that there will be more games where both CeeDee Lamb and Jake score touchdowns than there will be games where neither one of them scores any touchdowns. And there could be 0 games where neither one of them gets a touchdown. Like, that's possible. But those weeks where CeeDee Lamb has like 8 catches for 110 yards, but 0 touchdowns, nothing wrong with that. Have PPR. That's going to bring you 15 points easy, and then any kind of big bonuses possibly. But 15 points isn't like your league winning type of score. For those weeks, I think that you just increased your odds by having Jake Ferguson now in your tight end spot of having a huge week between the two of them. Because now, if Jake Ferguson has like 4 catches for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns, just move those 2 touchdown catches over to CeeDee Lamb, like theoretically here. All of a sudden, CeeDee Lamb has 10 catches for 100 and, let's say, 20 yards and 2 touchdowns. That 15 points goes to 17, 30, 27 points. Is that right? Something like that. 12 plus 17, 29 points, my bad. So, and then your tight end gets you 2 catches for 25 yards or so. So that's like 3.5 points, which honestly might beat out, might tie, will probably be within like plus or minus 3 points of your opponent's tight end a lot of weeks. So that's just something that's, I'm just reallocating that because that's what you kind of did when you take this pair, is you're taking the group score and just giving yourself that every week. And I think that it's going to be a pretty nice, consistent group score. I think a lot of the touchdowns that are scored throughout the season are going to one of these two from the Dallas Cowboys, receiving touchdowns at least. So there you go. Those are the wide receiver tight end stacks. Those were the quarterback wide receiver stacks. Thank you very, very much. Later on this week, we will be looking at the quarterback and tight end stack, which is the second most relevant stack in terms of the correlation with one another, and the wide receiver running back stack, which is kind of like an inverse stack. It gives you a weird dynamic that you may or may not want. So we'll dig in a little bit into those next week. And there you go. Thank you once again very much. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on these. Peace out.